Bom dia a todos! Bem-vindos de volta ao nosso...
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to our study tour. It's a huge pleasure to have everyone aboard. Yesterday, we had a wonderful day. We started with some statements of incentivization from Suzano and Veracel, sustainability management. And then we advanced with a 15th anniversary celebration for Fórum Florestal da Bahia and the Forest Dialogue, with a wonderful presentation and participation from Beto Mechisca, and some interesting participation of Miriam Prochnow as well. And we talked about the planning of the future with Oscar Paza. We talked about the company's responsibilities with Paulo Dimas, and about planning with Fernando Rodrigues. Afterwards, we had the presentation about the monitoring of land use, a very interesting explanatory video, and we had some information added by Professor Elfani Hayes as well. After this session, we had our traditional communities, starting with Cacaju, talking about solidarity economy and solidarity production. And then afterwards, Adriana Severino was talking about organic certification with the family farmers. And Danilo Ferraz from Agroecologia in the settlements, agroecology in the settlement. And to wrap up our day, we had a wonderful conversation with Mr. Rodo Barbosa, a fish producer from Itapebi. And now, to continue our agenda, we are going to continue with a very pleasant conversation with regional producers, with a diversified production, and together with organic production, agroecology, and monitoring. Who knows, we can establish productive corridors in our area, unifying the forest segments. Well, to start this next session, I would like to invite Mr. João Augusto. Please, João, let's activate your camera and your audio, please. Good morning, João. Good morning, Márcio. Good morning, everyone. Please, João, feel free. Introduce yourself, tell a little bit about you, tell us a little bit about the study tour. Okay, wonderful, Márcio. First of all, I would like to thank you and the coordinators, and I also would like to say that I'm very glad to be once again in a study tour, even though it's virtual, but it's always a wonderful experience. I am a forest engineer. Some of you already know me. I've been working for several years with forest companies, also in the region of Bahia State. I was participating actively with NGP, New Generation Plantations. I also took part in the Brazilian Forest Dialogue and also the Bahia Forest Forum, Fórum Florestal da Bahia, FFB. And I lived in Bahia, so it's a great satisfaction to take part and give a contribution in this panel that I'm going to be leading together with you guys. Wonderful, thank you so much. So, João, to start, as we always do in each session, let's play a motivational video. And after this video, João is going to start first session answering some questions with the participants. So please, participants, make questions during the video or during the participation of the producers. Don't leave it to the end, otherwise we won't have time to answer your questions. So send your questions as soon as possible. Technical team, please play the video for us. Enjoy the video, everyone.
Nós vamos mostrar aqui um pouco do serviço que a gente faz aqui na Fazenda Santa Maria, de Antônio Massara. Então nós estamos aqui em um viveiro de muda de cacau. Ó, tudo muda de cacau. Tá lá também, ó. Embaixo muda de cacau para aproveitar o espaço. E as baunilhas, que vai ficar definitivo, com um sombrite aqui de 50%. Foi cortada a parte superior e colocado um clone com fita biodegradável, né? Então, aqui é a área do cacau, que são aquelas mudas lá do viveiro que nós mostramos anteriormente. Aqui já está com 2 anos, ó, consorciado com o cubo. Olha o tamanho das covas feitas com a bronca, de 1 metro de profundidade, que vai ser metido com casca de coco, matéria orgânica, própria lavoura, ó. E olha o tamanho dessas mudas, ó. 2 anos de cacau, coisa muito boa, olha que bacana, ó. Muito bom, olha o coco também como vem bonito, olha. É um consórcio, é um casamento perfeito. Aqui é a pitaia, nós vamos começar a produzir pitaia também. Ó, aqui tudo a gente tira a muda. Um pequeno plantio, onde nós começamos para a muda.
Meu nome é Gilberto Cubete Borlini, sou produtor rural, estou hoje situado aqui no município de Itabela e a minha propriedade é a Fazenda Santa Fé, que é a 10 quilômetros aqui de Itabela, e a gente tem 4 culturas hoje que é a nossa sustentabilidade na nossa propriedade, que é café, pimenta, cacau e banana da terra. A gente tem 23% de áreas preservadas, de áreas de APP, né? As barragens são feitas em cima de ortogas d'água, ortoga de construção, ortoga d'água, enfim, a gente segue os parâmetros corretos da legislação para que a gente consiga prosperar cada vez mais na agricultura.
A Aspex, Associação dos Produtores de Eucaliptos do Sul e Extremo Sul da Bahia, reúne mais de 90 produtores associados, distribuídos em 150 propriedades rurais, florestais, onde praticamos a silvicultura sustentável e possuímos a dupla certificação FSC e Serflor, reunindo uma área total dos produtores associados às PECs na ordem de mais de 40 mil hectares, sendo desses 19 mil hectares de plantios de eucalipto de forma sustentável e 18 mil hectares de florestas naturais, Mata Atlântica preservada, representando as florestas naturais cerca de 30 a 40% da área de cada propriedade. Nas fazendas de silvicultura sustentável dos associados da Aspex, tem tratado a conservação da biodiversidade no nível de paisagem, preservando remanescentes da Mata Atlântica e implantando a silvicultura nas áreas plantadas e antropizadas, principalmente antigas pastagens degradadas, promovendo assim recuperação.
Há mais de 37 anos me dedico à produção agroflorestal, consorciando diversas espécies frutíferas como coco-anão, açaí e cupuaçu, além de outras. Na propriedade alinhamos produção agrícola e conservação ambiental. Formamos uma força-tarefa para auxiliar os agricultores a se adequarem às legislações mais recentes, o que contribui para o desenvolvimento harmônico do território. Como trabalhamos em culturas perenes em sistemas agroflorestal, contribuímos com o sequestro do carbono. Percebemos uma diminuição nos volumes de água, tanto nos córregos e rios, quanto no regime de chuvas da região, ampliando-se os períodos de secas, o que ocasiona perdas na produção. Para minimizar os efeitos das mudanças climáticas, temos que ter maior atenção e cuidado com as áreas de preservação permanente, principalmente as matas ciliares. A Simbiose Investimentos e Participações S.A. e seus projetos de reflorestamento no sul da Bahia vem ocupando antigas áreas de pastagens degradadas, com o objetivo de produzir madeira de reflorestamento de espécies nativas, resgatando espécies como jacarandá da Bahia, jequitibá rosa, pau-brasil, dentre muitas outras. O modelo Simbiose, além de produzir madeira de alta qualidade através do reflorestamento, induz o resgate da biodiversidade florística e faunística, melhora a conectividade da paisagem, contribui com a conservação do solo e mesmo no aumento da produção de água, atuando diretamente na recomposição dos serviços ambientais. Nosso modelo é replicável em outras áreas tropicais, viável em larga escala e também ao pequeno produtor, sendo uma alternativa econômica ao extrativismo madeireiro e mesmo ao modelo monocultural.
So let's resume our work. I hope you have all enjoyed the video. So with this video, we can have an idea on how the work happens in this region, how wealthy the region is, and this can be involving a huge exchange of experiences in this region of Bahia as well. And I would like to remember you all that we are going to have a panel with the topic agricultural diversity and regional development. And this panel will be divided into two blocks. The first block, I will be inviting 4 speakers who will be talking about agricultural production at a regional level. And at the second block, I'm going to invite a speaker who will talk about environmental legislation applied to rural production. So, to start, I would like to make just a quick observation, and you will notice, as you saw in the video and during the presentations, how wealthy this region is, and the opportunity that they who work with land and who plant this diversity of crops and plantations. And we always refer to this mosaic in the landscape, the diversity in the landscape. And the result will bring to us a greater environmental and social resilience, besides economic resilience as well. So we are on the correct pathway. We need to discuss and debate in this block how we could be expanding and leveraging the diversity that now you're going to hear about, and you will be able to debate with those who really work with the land, with those who are working in this region locally where the study tour is happening. So, to start this block, I would like to invite Felipe Marques, representing the company Symbiosis, to make his presentation. Felipe, please, can you please turn on your camera and your audio? Thank you very much. Hello, João. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to be here from the Fórum Florestal da Bahia and Márcio Braga. Thank you very much on behalf of Symbiosis. I am a manager of the Forest Management Department. So you can see how serious the company is. We plant exotic trees, but especially native trees here in southern Bahia. And we started our activities about 10 years ago, in 2010, selecting forest species of timber interest, because our production is for timber production, but it's a reforestation production. So we have bought lands where there were old pastures that were totally degraded, and we tested several species, around 56 different species of native trees, to see the adaptation to the region, to the soil, the species of Atlantic forest, by the way. So we rescued this first species, we tested the first species, and then we went to harvesting genetic material of the best species, or the species that had the best performance in the region. And we started planting, we started testing, we integrated different consortiums. We don't plant in monoculture, we use a consortium, we plant in consortiums, always with different format of spacings. So we studied all of those characteristics little by little in a test area, and we defined an optimized area to plant with the ideal consortium of species and the ideal spacing. And as I said, we work specially with native trees, but not exclusively with them. What else could I be sharing with you here now? Oh, so we've been in this region for 10 years. We have 670 planted hectares up to now, and this year we're going to plant another 152 hectares, exceeding 800 hectares, and the idea would be to expand the plantations to a greater area with 5,000 hectares, around 3,000 plantable areas, and a good area of conservation, unit of conservation, conservation unit. We conserve and restore the trees that, or in the areas that needs to be restored, and we start the planting those species which we work with. The ideas of working in consortium is that we are never going to have a shallow cut because the species work with different cycles of plantation. So the idea is never to have the shallow cut, and we plant several species in the same batch. Each will be harvested in a different moment. Each species will have a different color. Each species will have a different use. Among the species, I don't know if it was mentioned in the video, I'm not sure, but we have the Jitibá rosa, Jacarandá da Bahia. We plant another type of IP, Piático as well, among several other species. And of course, that we were narrowing in the selection of those species that we work with. The company has several base population of this species for genetic improvement. So we restored the areas. We have a data bank of germplasm. All the trees are identified. We know who is the mother of all of those trees and who are the sisters or the half sisters. And these areas, from these areas, we are going to have new breedings and genetic material improvement, better results of timber in terms of volumetric results. And we also have our cloning program, which is the massive selection in the fields of the best individuals, of the best species as well. And we rescue in clones, just like we do it for eucalyptus and pinus. So we are very delayed. We're running after this from now on, and we are finding great success running after this objective. Okay, so I believe that's it for now, and I'm going to leave some time this moment for other people that are participating and watching us on YouTube, so I can answer also their questions in case they sent us some questions as well. Okay, thank you very much, Felipe. I would like to thank you for your participation, and please, you can, if you would like, you can continue with the video, but please turn off the audio so we can follow the presentation of our other colleagues. And we have to highlight that it's a very important and rich activity for the protection of the Atlantic forest biome, protection and production of forest timber products that the society demands. So the initiative of the Symbiosis company is really very important for Brazil and the whole world. And I'm going to pass the word now to our colleagues. You can start making questions to the participants. And in the end of the block, I will be directing these questions to Felipe and the other three participants. So please, participants, make questions, analyze the information from Symbiosis company in the video and what Felipe told us here, and start making questions and sending us the questions via chat box. This debate is very important. These questions that you send us is very important because this way you guys in different parts of the world could learn a little bit more about these activities here in Southern Bahia or in Brazil. So, continuing, I would like to invite now our friend, Mr. Gleison Araújo, who is a representative of the Association of Eucalyptus Producers in the region South and extreme Southern Bahia, to complement with some actions to complement the video that you have already watched. So I will ask Gleison now to highlight, to using 5-10 minutes at most to complement the information from the videos and to add anything he would like to add so people could know a little bit more about the region and your work. Gleison, please. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gleison Araújo de Jesus. I am now the executive president of ASPEX. ASPEX is the Association of Eucalyptus Producers in Southern and Extreme Southern Bahia. We are now united in associations comprehending more than 90 associated members, and we exceed more than 140 rural holdings, rural properties and we started meeting in around 2006, and we started working so together we could know more about the silviculture process that was presented to us recently in around 2003. So we united to know a little bit more, to learn a little bit more about, well, our institution aspects is based in the municipality of Eunápolis, 60 kilometers away from the city of Porto Seguro. And our area of actions comprehends more than 10 municipalities around us, like Eunápolis, Itabela, Porto Seguro, Guaratinga, Itabela, Belmonte, Santa Cruz Carvalho, Itagimirim, Mascote. So we have more than 10 municipalities where we have associated members linked to our association aspects. Aspects tries with the partners to act in a way that we could have sustainable forests. We participated in a process, or we are certified by FSC and CEFOR. We have a double certification for over 10 years, and we have been working very hard, right, João Augusto? And we were glad to be introduced to this challenge. We believed, we liked the idea, and we started implementing it in our farms for over 10 years. This program, or the two seals, FSC and CEFOR, and this brings a huge demand to our work because we had to make several changes with our associated members at Aspects. As I've said, and I repeat, we work for more than 10 years. We have the double certification, and we were already certified for re-certified twice. And that's very interesting because we experienced not only being certified, but also being recertified, and with a number of 90 associated members, 40 farms, and we will make all the adequations, adjustments necessary so we can fulfill the demands and the norms and the criteria for FSC and CEFOR. So at the beginning, it was really difficult for us to be adapted to them, but currently we have the happiness to have around 40,000 hectares of our areas of associated members, total area, and we have around 19,000 hectares of planted area of the associated members, and 18,000 areas of conserved areas, considering units of conservation and permanent reserves. So these numbers is very emblematic for us. We have 19,000 areas of planted areas, almost one-to-one, 18,000 areas of conserved area. And counting with the support of God and the great power of restoration of the region, we have reports, very interesting stories of the evolution on how our region has this strong power of regeneration, and allied to this work of conservation, we could see the benefits from that conservation, of course, following a very efficient management plan with plantations in mosaics, allowing the corridors to have this protection. So we, Aspects Association, we continue with this unity with the associated members so we can try to work in a sustainable fashion. When we saw the concept of certification for forest management, FSC and CEFOR, these words started being part of our daily life. And these words we can mention sustainability. And we focused a lot on the sustainability tripod. We tried to be economically feasible, considering all the challenges we have, aiming on social integrations and working with the social side, and we also work on the environmental side. So our association has this intention of sustaining this tripod, not only to work with fulfill the pre-requirements, the legal requirements, but we understand and we comprehend during this 10 years. And now this is already transferred to other properties. Like, for example, those coffee farms you could see in the video, our friend Gilberto, and other livestock ranchers, they already take these planted forests and the best practices of the planted forests to these other farms. So this is a reflex of the 10-year work, a hard work during these 10 years for the recertification of this forest management. Okay, so wonderful, Gleison. Certainly, I would like to thank you for your participation up to now and complementing information of the video. I think it's very important for once again, I would like to call the attention to the audience to make questions, remarks. Please send your questions and remarks to Gleison. Gleison already gave us a very important hint, which is the possibility of having an exchange between the productive chains. He talked about the practices in sustainable silviculture that could also be applied and enhanced in other productive activities like coffee, other plantations like cocoa. So this is another great opportunity that between the sustainable chains in the Southern Bahia, so they can be even more integrated in a win-win situation. As then you reduce the costs and they will have a higher standards of results. Thank you very much, Gleison. Now continuing with this block, as I've mentioned, we are talking about agricultural regional production. I just would like to make an observation before. Gleison, please leave your camera on, but your audio off, and you can continue participating here with us in this panel. So if you can come back with your video, please. Thank you. Continuing now, I will invite Renato Doria. Renato Doria is a producer. He is the owner of Dom Sossego Farm in the region of Southern Bahia. So please, Renato Doria. Thank you for your participation here, Renato. So you would have here 5 to 7 minutes so you could detail and highlight any additional points that you would like besides the message from the video. Renato, the word is yours. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here sharing the work we do and the work that we have been developing in this region for almost 4 decades. I have a background as an agronomist in Exalc, São Paulo, University of São Paulo. And I postgraduated in fruit culture in the plantation of fruits in the University of Bahia. I came here in 1983 to this region to live in the property that I own until today, and I live in it. I lived in this property for 10 years without electricity, so now it's very nice and good. And I could experience in these 4 decades, in these 40 years, the retaking of lands for agriculture, livestock, and silviculture. I went through this experience. It's a long story, but very interesting. In my case, specifically, we started with agriculture. In that time, papaya was our main crop, our first plantation. After, we went to coconut, and in Porto Seguro, did not have coconut. Porto Seguro had to bring from other cities, other regions, because of tourism in this region here. So we had to import coconut. And the coconut culture, it was the first plantation or crop funded by the Nordeste Bank. And with the advancing of time, the agriculture must have the perception of cycles, let's say. So we implemented the cupuaçu culture, the cupuaçu crop as well that I learned about it in the Amazon during a trip that I made, and I loved cupuaçu. Cupuaçu is from the same family of the cocoa. So after 5 years of coconut, we started this consortium with the other products, with cupuaçu. So now we have 25 years of cupuaçu, and we never needed to use pesticides and fertilizers. We never had significant problems with it. And after this period, after the 10 years, we also introduced another crop. Well, this was always in the same area, right? We had an irrigation, and then we also implemented the acai plant. It was another plant that I investigated, and I could see that we did not have phytosanitary problems with it as well, needing the use of fertilizers and pesticides. So then, after all this time, and now working on this area with 25 years, we never had to work on the soil because the soil is super fertile, and the coconut terminated because the other crops took over their area. And the coconut trees were replaced by an agroforestry of acai, cupuaçu, and other fruits, spontaneous fruits like cajá, mango, guava, some other fruits, and banana as well, lots of banana. And we set up a agroforestry system that was very interesting. And I would say that it's almost self-sustainable if it wasn't the need to introduce external nutrients to the environment. The plants extract from the soil, so it's impossible to have an agricultural production without replacing the nutrients in general, NPK, calcium, magnesium, and etc. We need to restore that, otherwise productivities will not reach favorable levels of economy and sustainability as well. With the passing of time, the crop of eucalyptus was introduced in the region, and with these two fruits, then we were forced to set up a system of consumption and storage of the fruits. And 10 years ago, we created a pulp factory for cupuaçu and acai fruits. And this factory produces wastes, and this waste, like the nuts or the seeds of the acai, and they produce a sugar or a chocolate because they are from the cocoa family, and the peels of cupuaçu as well. And from the seeds and the peel of cupuaçu, we make the organic composting with this waste. But we have a lot of use for these two materials. They can be burnt in ovens. Veracel already got in touch with us to analyze the feasibility of burning this material and consuming this material for their oven. And it's very interesting because it would be an exchange between the plantations and the farms. And we also have the production, we use a lot of humus from Veracel for nutrients. We also use the organic matter of Veracel because it's really good. So with the advance of our pulp industry, our fruit pulp industry, we were able to access large markets out of the region, but in the region that the people also love our product because our product is pure without adding water, conservatives, or artificial ingredients. And we have the credibility of our clients, which is really interesting. The geographic situation of my farm, is favorable for the visitation of students from UFSB, the Federal University of Southern Bahia. We received basically monthly visits before the pandemics. We had lots of students visiting us, and also visitation from schools, from the city. Very interesting. From IFBA courses as well, the Federal Institute of Bahia. And they had lots of experiments with fauna because acai and cupuaçu is a different style of plantation because we use little fertilizers and pesticides. And according to a study with birds, that would be considered the restaurant of birds. And as we are right between two reserves or two conservation units, which is the Jaqueira Reserve and Veracel Reserve, our farm is establishing a corridor between these two areas. and I have 2 or 3 units of conservation registered in our property, I believe. And one would be continuous with Veracel's reserve, and they have a very beautiful dam of hundreds years ago, of the past millennium, and it makes that this space, the birds and the fauna that are very abundant in the reserves and in my area, use our plantations to eat, to feed. The birds feed in our plantations. They use it also as a shelter, and we have also been related to an entity called Airbnb. And Airbnb came to make some experiments selling experiences in the region of Porto Seguro. That's a region that in the 70s also started receiving with foreigners and alternative communities. So it became a part of a link with past times. And that's very interesting because they have this diversity and different ideals in these communities. And we set up this experience with the Airbnb, and we have already received lots of visitors. Açaí, from the name of our experience in Airbnb is Açaí, from plantations to the bowl. So people come to visit us. They stay the whole afternoon visiting the farm and learning about the process. So it's very interesting. And we've been trying to, well, this experience has been trying to share with the community, and it has been a very good result. This announcing or this participation or a greater integration is the hardest difficulty that we have. And that's it, basically. Wonderful, Renato. Thank you so much for your participation, for this rich explanation about your property, your holding, and about the opportunities. And once again, I would like to call the attention to all the participants of this study tour or this panel. Up to now, we have already talked about 3 main activities and 3 ways of working on the farm that are kind of different, but we can also identify the wealth that we have and the diversity and the potential that we have in this region to produce so many different crops and species and products that are important for the region and also for exports for the region. I also would like to highlight that Renato's activity, well, if you paid attention during his presentation, that his holding, his farm, composes an ecological corridor. He is producing lots of agroforestry products, and he is connecting remaining areas of the Atlantic forest biome. So there is a huge potential, not only in the economic side, but also in conservation of biodiversity in the farm and the biodiversity of the region. And that is very, very important to be observed. Yes, Renato. Another data, our property has 650 hectares. 50% would be Atlantic forest biome being conserved. 50%. It's one of the farms that has one of the lowest levels of agricultural use, but we're very proud and happy for that, for having this large area of conservation and still survive without impacting the forests. Wonderful, certainly. And this can show the potential of ecosystemic services as well. And that wonder must be recompensated to the producer. An area of more than 50% of Renato's holding would be preservation area, conservation area, and he is offering these environmental services to the society. Thank you very much, Renato. So, continuing our agenda in this first morning, in this morning, I would like to invite now Mr. Antonio Marsaro. Antonio, please join us. Turn on your camera and your audio, please. Mr. Antonio. Mr. Antonio Massaro is the owner of Santa Maria Holding, Santa Maria Farm, and he will be with us here. Okay, Mr. Antonio Massaro, thank you for your participation once again. Mr. Antonio Massaro is the owner of Santa Maria Farm. Mr. Antonio will talk to us for about 5 or 7 minutes to reinforce what was said in the video, and also share some other details, add some other details that were not on the video. So we could all afterwards make our questions and debate and discuss about this wealthy experiences of the region. Thank you, Antonio. The word is yours. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It's a huge satisfaction to be participating with you. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Well, as you said, I am Antonio Massaro. I arrived here back there in the 80s. I came from a federal agro-technical school in Itabira, in the north of Espírito Santo State, more precisely in Colatina municipality. And I was based here in Porto Seguro. I anchored in Porto Seguro. When I arrived here, I didn't have a beard, and now I have gray beard, and I'm very happy for that. I'm very glad for that. So I saw lots of changes in this region, even the changes of my white beard, my gray beard. So what I see in this region, what is happening in this region is that we are growing and developing together with the region. Renato Doria is also from that time in the past, and we could see Porto Seguro, the municipality of Porto Seguro, being highlighted or standing out. Our agriculture has been standing out because it's a diversified agriculture. I believe it's very interesting because here we have gathered several factors, several aspects for the success of our agriculture and our silviculture that has a considerable cubic meter area of hectare, one of the highest in Brazil. Our region, our micro region of Anápolis and Porto Seguro is where we have the highest metric number in Brazil. I believe our friend didn't say this, but I think he can confirm what I'm saying. And I pay a lot of attention to this because my father in the past was the one that made up the machine to unpeel the eucalyptus before the robots. So I was paying very close attention to this area of silviculture. Our conditions of diversification, it's very interesting to say because here we have all the climatic conditions for all crops, most of the crops, let's say, where we're able to achieve a successful number. I started planting beans, pumpkins, and then papaya. I saw that papaya was a very interesting crop. And then we used everything by cycles. The papaya, and after we had the coconut cycle, and now the cocoa. And I am diversifying the property with 2 new crops in the region, which is pitaya, the dragon fruit, and vanilla. Vanilla, I'm producing vanilla in a greenhouse with 50% shadowing, but I'm going to introduce it in the Atlantic forest, and I'm conserving the areas of Atlantic forest that would be in a decrease where I plant the piaçava trees. Piaçava is making me very happy compared to the early days because I am already harvesting the first piaçava trees. So I want now to introduce in the Atlantic forest biome, together with the piaçava, the vanilla. So I already have a 1,500 square meters area, square kilometers producing seedlings. I already performed the whole process of seedlings until the essence of the vanilla, the extract of vanilla, so I can send it to the market in São Paulo. And when I arrived in São Paulo, I saw that this was working very well, and it made me very happy. Piaçava tree, I think it's very interesting for this region, and our colleague here talked about the diversification of extracts and essences from the Atlantic forest. Piaçava tree is very interesting, but I find three important aspects because besides conservation, we have piaçava, which is the raw material to produce brooms to sweep the house. We have the bagasse for the coverage of kiosks and huts and to make the coverage of structures. Then we have the seed. The seed, besides being good for arts and crafts, which is interesting, I think it's also food for rodents, pacas, cotillas, the local rodents. And I think it's also very interesting because this will add an income to the producer, even if it's in an extractive manner, but it's an extra income. And besides conserving your waters, your forests, mainly the corridors, I want to see that if in my property I can connect the corridor with Renato Doria, because we are in the similar biome, so we are already neighbors, and now we are going to be neighbors with ecological corridors. And I think that's going to be a wonderful idea. So, in terms of diversification, that's what I have to say, but I'm also working with cocoa now. We have to, how Renato mentioned, a very interesting point that he mentioned, Renato Doria mentioned, about the perception that we must have around the changes of our products, agricultural products. So I believe strongly in the cocoa production because it's planted in a consortium with coconut as well. And I see this as a perfect marriage, the coconut and cocoa, because in the future, the coconut will leave space for the main crop, which is the cocoa. Now, it is a secondary crop. So, these are some aspects that we see in the region, the transformation of the region, the things that are happening, and now we have this new airport for this region, for our region. I'm located by Highway 397 in kilometer 47 near the roundabouts to Trancoso. So I believe that this region is extremely important for this context of this forum that is happening, this dialogue. Yes, it's very important for this macro vision or this macro view. So every day I am more motivated, I'm happier, felice, as the Italian says. Well, that's what I would like to say for now. And I believe I'm about to run out of time, so I would like to thank you all for the opportunity, and I'm very happy to be here. Wonderful one, Mr. Antonio. It's wonderful to have you here. You were telling us some new aspects, adding some new information for this panel, for the blog. I don't know if you all knew about these experiences with pitaya, which is the dragon fruit, and vanilla, looking at the whole productive chain, because it's very interesting what Mr. Antonio just mentioned, and Mr. Renato Doria, with the industrialization of the fruit pulp, because you need to work with the different links of the productive chain. Otherwise, the producer will sell a commodity, and there will be a hostage, hostage of a market. If they can, in the region, they can compose the productive chain, this will add more value. Remembering Renato that he mentioned that there is a differential in the region in the client's value. The clients pay for it. Sometimes we don't have the financial value to the product, but there is the preference of the clients in the market. So Renato and Mr. Antonio mentioned this common point, and I believe it's very important that could be in the debate, which is the productive chain, being better industrialized and generating greater value for the region. Well, so now we're going to start our Q&A session. We have got around 20 minutes, let's say. I have already several questions here that were sent by the participants, but I have one here that I already want to start answering. One question was a general question for what are the municipalities that the speakers act in? Well, Gleison from ASPEX Association, the producer, eucalyptus producers, they work with 10 municipalities in this region of Costa do Descobrimento Coast. So they work with 10 municipalities. But the three others, they work in the municipality of Porto Seguro. And when you guys are going to answer the questions, you can add if you work with some other municipalities, okay? So the eucalyptus producers aspects association are in 10 municipalities of the region. Mr. Antonio Massaro, Felipe from Symbiosis, and Mr. Renato Doria are based in the municipality of Porto Seguro. Another observation is that we also use a lot of acronyms. And just clarifying a little bit of what Renato said when he talks about the RPPN in Brazil. Those of you that are not familiarized with this acronym and are not from Brazil, RPPN means Private Reserve of Natural Heritage. It's a reserve of forest in the case of Renato. He said that he has basically 2 or 3 reserves like that, and it's a reserve of permanent protection. So he decided to preserve that area, to conserve that area, and that will not be modified, even if he sells or transfers the property of the farm to other people in the future. So I would now like to go to some other questions. I have a question here for Gleison Araújo from ASPEX Association. The question is, what is the possibility of taking ASPEX model to other productions, other crops? Okay, first of all, I would like to take advantage of this question and answer session to thank for the wonderful statement of Antonio Massaro in regards to our high productivity. Yes, in this region of Southern Bahia, we have the highest numbers of productivity per year in the country and maybe in the world. So thank you so much for adding that information, Mr. Antonio. And I believe that Ivone, my friend Ivone, was asking about this possibility. Well, we believe, Ivone, that this is possible to be taken to other crops and productions, being them cocoa, which has a great aptitude in the region, papaya, coffee. Considering this motivation of certification to forest management, being with agriculture or silviculture, this interest focused on the certification of forest management brings a special attention and a greater motivation to do that work. And before that, the understanding of the producer and believing in this activity, so together we can do the best work possible. Gleison, thank you so much for your answer. Now I have a question, and I would like to ask 2 speakers to answer those questions based on their experiences. It's a question that comes from another country, and it's very interesting to have this exchange as well, provided here by Study Tour. The question is, I will ask Felipe Marques and Renato Doria to answer these questions. This question. The question is, well, if there is any recommendation of the minimum area of activities when you combine conservation and production of timber. That goes for Felipe. And for Renato Doria, when you combine the conservation or preservation and production of other crops, like Renato Doria has in his agroforestry system. So if you 2 could talk a little bit more about this in terms of recommendation for the minimum area, so you could have an economically feasible activity for the small producers. Felipe, please, can you start? Well, symbiosis as a standard, we focused on the number 60-40. 60% of production and 40% of conservation. Depending on the farm or the holding, it could be 50-50, 50 of preservation, 50 of production. Well, I can't uh, confirm for the small producer, but it's probably around 70-30, I would say, especially because of the forest legislation. Renato, do you have anything else to add? Well, as far as I could see or understand from this question, is the minimum area for the survival of a family, let's say, for the subsistence of a family, right? Well, yes, the minimum area for you to be able to have a model of conservation and production of wood, in the case of symbiosis, and the minimum area to have a good preservation and production of agroforestry production, as you mentioned. Oh, I would just like to add this information. For the smaller producers, I believe that we must have a greater diversification. For example, symbiosis example is on timber. It's wood production. All the activity is based on the plantations, maintenance, and afterwards the harvesting of this material. And I believe that the smaller producer should think, and here we work at a long term. I'm talking about 12, 18, 24, 36 years. That would be the last cycle. 36 years would be the last cycle. It's continuous, but you must have an end to it. So the account closes. But I will have to think about planting cassava, banana, cocoa, or coffee, or cupuaçu, or everything together in a consortium. Well, Renato. Yes, that's correct, Felipe. In terms of conservation of an area for nature, well, that will vary in the area from 30 to 50% normally. It will depend. Sometimes you have areas with larger plateaus that you have a good usage, but they are already deforested. What I could understand then would be the ideal size or the ideal dimension for a farm to be sustainable, to sustain a family of small producers, right? Yeah, that's right. This question, well, I have always been discussing with people in the region about the subsistence of this small farm. So we should have a minimum that would comprehend one agricultural machine. It's no good if you have 5 hectares. If you have 5 hectares of vegetables, you're going to use an agricultural machine. Nobody works manually nowadays. So in a farm, the farm needs to have machinery. It must be modern. The manual tools are now obsolete already. So we have to think about a minimum of infrastructure in that small holding. It's not only choose a crop or a plantation. Well, obviously, if it's a small property and people live from it as the medium properties, we have to consider the crops that are rentable or feasible all year long or some parts of the year. We have plantations that 3 years from now would be harvested. You have a plantation of eucalyptus that 7 years from now will be harvested and have a good income. So as in a small farm, you could be planning it in a way that you could coexist with all the other plantations. But necessarily, you will need income, a fast income. Otherwise, a small farm will not be able to survive. Silviculture is recommended in large scale for those that have means of survival, that don't depend exclusively on it for that moment. And the small farms that depend on the farm, even my farm that is a medium farm, or Antonio Massaro's farm, which is medium, we need to have a plantation that brings us income so we can pay the farmer, the workers, or pay the taxes and survive. It's not easy, this ideal, but the ideal is that, well, it's no good if you have a very small farm and you can't even use a machine in the farm. It's 10 very small properties to use the machine, and it's not very economic. Okay, I understand. So here, you mentioned in your answer the need to create activities that could be complementing and bringing a financial return, because the cash flow, bringing cash flow to the rural producer. And Renato also called the attention that you should have a minimum of area, depending on your activity, to be able to use the mechanization models. So several factors to be observed here. Mr. Antonio, you would like to add something? In this planning, agricultural planning of the property, for example, a 60 horsepower tractor would work with 30 hectares, let's say, a medium machine. So in this planning, we need to be adjusted to, well, according to the situation. So up to 30 hectares, a 60 horsepower tractor would be enough, ideal, let's say. Oh, okay. So now I have another question to Mr. Antonio Massaro. And the question is, Mr. Antonio, what is the legislation or what is the requirements of the legislation for the plantations of vanilla and pitaya, which is a dragon fruit, and other exotic plantations, possibly in permanent protection areas? But what is APP, another acronym? APP is a permanent preservation area, which is demanded by the legislation, and normally they are located along the river banks, the lakes, and the water springs. So the question is, if we plant vanilla and pitaya or dragon fruit in these APP areas? If yes, what would be the requirements or the legislations? Thank you for turning on the audio, Mr. Massaro. Yes. There we go. Okay. So just to rephrase your question. Well, pitaya or dragon fruit is an open open plantation crop. It's not an athletic forest. It needs open area to be planted. Lots of sunlight. So pitaya or the dragon fruit cannot have a shadowing. The vanilla, yes, the vanilla will be part of the Atlantic forest because it needs a 50 to 70% of shadow. So it will, and even though because it is a native species of the Atlantic forest, we have several species, native species, but non-productive. The productive ones, well, they need a protocol so we can get to this production. It's not as simple as just going and planting. No, it took me 5 years to develop this protocol. It exists, but it doesn't exist, let's say. It has a lot of literature, but in practice, that's where we're going to make concrete or turn the protocol to reality. So I did this from the beginning until the market. I didn't go to the French market or the international market yet, but I'm very close to that because there is a French guy who lives here in southern Bahia region, in Tancredo Neves region, that got in touch with me, and he is going to make this bridge, this connection with the French market. So in terms of legislation, what I wanted to say is I have a native extraction or essence of Atlantic forest, but to produce it at a legislation level, as I'm not producing it yet, I still have to see this pathway of the legislation. Well, it's a very important, right, Mr. Massaro? I think this point that we're discussing of the legal requirements for an Atlantic forest species to be developed commercially, we have to consider this point to the next block as well, that we'll be talking about the environmental legislations being applied to rural production. I just wanted to make one more question now. Can I use this opportunity here and add something? Well, when we talk about plantation of this vanilla or produce the essence of the Atlantic forest, I want to make it very clear that the Atlantic forest will be used just as a shadower because it's an orchidea. It's a kind of a orchidea plant. So the trees will be used as a tutor, a living tutor, a living support, and that will be excellent. That will be very good. That will be very positive for the harmony. Wonderful, certainly. So I have one question here now for Felipe from Symbiosis Company. If there is a relationship between Symbiosis and the units of conservation and the recovery or the restoration of vegetation coverage of those conservation units. If yes, how do you or how could you give some support? Because the question here mentions that lots of those units of conservation in the unit or preservation areas, they suffer with deforestation, and there are some areas that needs to be restored. And Symbiosis working with native species, well, the question is if there is a kind of a relationship in this line, Felipe. Well, we have relationships with the National Park of Pau Brasil, which is very close to us. We are also going towards Trancoso for those that know the region. Those that don't know the region, please come and visit us. We have, in fact, 3 farms, one near Trancoso, one near Caraíva, and one near Praia do Espelho. And near Pau Brasil, we have our head office, which is close to the park. We have a relationship with this park, and we have other private reserves also. We don't have a direct connectivity like border to border, but there is a connectivity of the permanent areas, conservation areas, and the legal preservation areas. It was not thought as an ecological corridor, but it could become an ecological corridor indirectly. In regards to participating in the replantation of degraded areas, well, the reforestation, yes, of course we could do that. We are a small company and we produce our own seedlings, and we have to make that clear. And we produce with the demand. So we have the demands, and we always plant a surplus. And this surplus is donated to the private reserves or to the park if they have interest. We also donate to the local community because we are closer to Coqueiroado community, which is a kind of a village of nearby Porto Seguro. We plant trees in that community, and we donate for those that are interested to receive these donations, because we can't sell them because we don't have the license to sell. So we buy, we produce the seedlings, we plant, and the surplus we can donate, better than just throwing it away. The results would be much better. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much, Felipe. I just wanted to make an observation. The person that made the question, that is not from Brazil, that made the question about the minimum area of the farms for the agroforestry activities, also raised a concern because this area sometimes could be very small, and this would not bring the economic return or the financial return for the agroforestry, considering the management costs for the conservation. I also would like to mention that the conservation of this forest in this region, really, well, this is a very wealthy region in rain. The rainfall is constant, so we have a good lighting, sunlight, and temperature level as well. So we have a huge potential for the restoration of the farm. So if you conserve not to, so people to deforest your area, or not to have interventions in the biodiversity, the conservation of the forest will happen on its own. It will be complemented on its own. And I just wanted to ask for another contribution from Renato. Well, do you act, or do you have other activities in preservation and conservation of your areas, Renato? Or do you simply protect against interventions, and that's enough for the conservation, Renato? Well, we made some interventions around 20 years ago, and in some cuts of permanent areas where they built or set up some dams, the result was weak. But we have small vegetation. In the past, they didn't have anything because the soil was very degraded in the underground. So the areas that we left as remaining areas, and the lands were bought from uh, timber producers, and they had already removed most of the areas, right? So the forests are there now stopped, and they are restoring for about 35 years in the minimum, at least. So we don't have lots of problems, no major problems. We don't have in our area problems or issues with regeneration. We plant some trees in some areas, near fences and near the highways, EPs, just as for the purpose of uh, making the landscape. And agroforestry or agroforestry system, in my view, if you will introduce plants that are useful for the man, like food or commercial plants in a forest, you will lose most of this wealth that you already mentioned that we have in southern Bahia. Lots of sunlight, lots of rain, because the plants depend on sunlight. Without sunlight, we have no photosynthesis. A cupuaçu plant, for example. My neighbors planted cupuaçu in the forest 10 years ago that they planted cupuaçu, and they have never seen one fruit per year, not even one fruit per year. And my in constant sunlight in a consortium with acai produces 100, 200 fruits per year, a tree that is about 10 meters high. So sometimes we must be careful not to frustrate our our producer life, thinking that a plant will be successful inside the forest. No, Antonio Massaro planted piaçava, which is native of the forest, and after 15 years, he started harvesting piaçava. You can harvest, but it's not economically feasible. The conservation of the forest, which is essential for the conservation of the area and the city or the riparian forests, and individually uh, produce a light agriculture, or I like the word rational, a rational agriculture, aligning the best practices of agriculture. We have a science called agronomy that can also be used. We have professionals, agronomists that are very, how can I say, they have lots of know-how to bring to us with lots of good ideas and try to do something that is feasible for for those that start with a small production in their farms. So the production could be a little bit separate from the forest. Okay, I understand. Wonderful. So this message is very clear for us now. Maybe most of the crops or the plantations for agroforestry or for just closing the corridors would be separate from the preservation areas. So area for conservation and preservation will be generating the ecosystemic services like water, biodiversity, carbon stock, and other maybe possible other economies. But when we talk about, and in this case that was mentioned here, like agroforestry, it is established in an open area, and then you have the formation of trees and bushes that will also generate income to the producer. So maybe that is what is very well explained, and now it's even more clear for us in terms of preservation and in terms of agroforestry. And it's interesting because agroforestry and all the activities that were debated here, they also make up a forest extract. They form or they compose the mosaic of trees in the region, enriching the services and mainly the biodiversity. Mr. Antonio mentioned the issue with the animals, and if we have these activities established in the region, we have naturally the formation of those corridors for the fauna and for the flora. We have an observation with Renato before we can continue to the next session. Lots of people say, I'm going to plant cocoa to take advantage of the forest and to protect the forest. No, contrary to that, when you introduce a crop into a forest, or you will destroy the underforest or the bioforest. The culture of cocoa, which is a good product to preserve the forests in southern Bahia, doesn't have this underforest. They have those huge trees that makes the shadowing for the cabruca cocoa, but the cabruca cocoa is a word, well, you have to eliminate the forest, eliminate the under trees, eliminate the babies from the forests, the youth and the babies of the forest. You have to destroy them, and that's a crime. And that's a crime for the preservation of forests. You are destroying the diversity of the forest and with the regeneration of the culture or the crop. I would like to thank you all for your participation. Uh, you all brought unique experiences that to this debate, but it's very important for all the participants of this study tour so they can also be relating directly to the speakers or to the organizers of the event like Marcio, so they can establish the contact with people that are interested in those experiences as well. I'm very glad to learn more about this wealth, about this potential of economic production and this potential aligned to conservation. It's a wonderful opportunity for the region to enrich and to strengthen all of the chains and interact the chains. This is a wonderful opportunity that we have. That one activity that Renato brings could be used as an example to improve the performance of Felipe's activity and vice versa. So I believe that this is what we should encourage and leverage more. Thank you so much once again to each of the speakers of the panel, Mr. Antonio Massaro, Felipe Marques, Gleison Araújo, and Renato Doria. And I now would like to ask you all to turn off your audio and video so we can advance to the second block of this panel. Okay? Thank you, everyone. So, continuing now with our next block of this session, we now could be going to the block of environmental legislation being applied to rural production. To speak about this and to answer some questions to you guys from the audience, I would like to invite now Dr. Fabio. So Dr. Fabio, please turn on your audio and video. Good morning, Fabio. Good morning, João. Good morning, everybody here with us. I will now introduce very quickly Fabio. I'm sorry that I'm calling you Fabio and not Dr. Fabio due to some time that we have been working together in common in this. So Dr. Fabio, but here we can refer to him as Fabio. Fabio is an attorney or a prosecutor for the Public Prosecution Office in the state of Bahia. He's the manager of the Legal Forest Program from the Strategic Management from the Public Prosecution Office in the state of Bahia. And he's also the first secretary of the Association of Members from the Public Prosecution Office for the environment sector. It's a specific action in the Public Prosecution Office that deals about environment issues. And Fabio is the secretary. And he's also a master in science and environmental technologies. So Dr. Fabio will make a presentation to us. You already see his slides on the screen. And in the end of this presentation, we're going to open for questions. So please continue sending your questions to us. So Fabio, please. Thank you very much, João Bushi, for the invitation by the organization to be here. congratulations for the Forum Florestal of Bahia for this wonderful event. Perfect up to now. And I'm very glad to be able to contribute somehow, talking a little bit about the environmental legislation being applied to rural holdings or rural states. Well, it was very interesting from the organization to include my participation after the rural producers, because certainly when we talk about agricultural production, we always have doubts and questions in relation to the legislation being applied to rural holdings and properties. And those that are out of Brazil are asking, what is the role of a public prosecutor in the execution or the inspection or monitoring of environmental legislation? And that's why I will start my presentation bringing to you a little bit about my institution, the Public Prosecutor's Office. I am a prosecutor in the state of Bahia for almost 16 years, and this position of protection for the environmental laws is not very common out of Brazil in different countries. Our country has this classic division between the three powers, the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And lots of times, out of Brazil or in different countries, we see the public prosecutor's office connected to the executive power. We see indications of maybe this institution might even be connected to the judicial branch, but the roles of the public prosecutor's office would be designated to a specific judge. And this does not happen in Brazil. We have an institution that, due to the federal constitution, it's a permanent constitution. It's essential to the traditional operation of the state. And it's up to this institution the defense of the legal order, the democratic regime, and the social interests and individual interests that are needed. So that figure, that person that we usually see in movies, right? A prosecutor nominated to a criminal action, going to the jury and trying to responsibilize criminally someone for that, is very different in Brazil. When the Constitution attributes to the public prosecutor's office the defense of the legal order, this would also include the environmental order. So the presentation, the Constitution, after the Constitution of 1988, principally, we would have the strengthening of the institution for the defense of collective interests, for the defense of environment. And when we talk about environmental protection, our legal or federal constitution is based on our laws, or our legislation is based on the federal constitution, and the last one is from 1988. And that means that all the infra-constitutional laws should obey the mother law, which is the federal constitution. And this does not avoid that other previous law, if complied, they should still remain into effect, such as the case of one of our main environmental laws, which would be a National Environmental Policy Law, which is a law from 1981. Since then, this National Environmental Policy Law considers the responsibilization of the environmental polluter, or the agent that pollutes the environment, independently of their guilt. And that's what we call objective responsibility. So we are not trying to blame someone. After the moment that someone causes environmental damage, even though if they don't have the intention, by law, they are forced to restore that damage or repair that damage. And even the same law of 1981 puts the public prosecutor's office in a position of being the institution to try to confirm the repair of the environmental damage, and that was confirmed by the Constitution of 1988. Several other laws could be applied to rural properties in general as well. We have the law of National System of Conservation Units. internationally, we have the designation of areas, areas of preservation or protected areas. And here in Brazil, we have this expression, conservation units or protected areas. These would be the national parks, they are areas of environmental preservation, they are extractivist areas, and the one also mentioned by you, João, which is the RPPN, which is the protected area, different from the other ones that are located. But now this RPPN is in a private area. Normally, our protected areas or conservation units are in public lands or ones constituted. The public land, the public power has the obligation to acquire the public properties that exist in that area. So, for example, this reserve acronym, I remember it now. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. The RPPN acronym. So it's a private reserve of natural heritage. It's a protected area because not only it protects what is in that property or area, but it also could have the role of ecological corridors connecting other protected areas. Specifically, in relation to the forest legislation, we have three laws applied. The first one is the Public Forests Management Law, which is highly applied in the Amazon region, highly applied in areas that are exclusively public, where the public power would conceive the management of those public areas to some private entities or individuals. And that's not the case in our region here in the state of Bahia, because we are specifically in the southern and extreme southern Bahia in Atlantic forest biome, which has a special protection since 1990, but currently this protection is under law 11,428, which is the Atlantic Forest Law. And finally, the last one, which is the law that has the greatest applicability to rural properties, independently of the biome where they are located in, would be the Native Vegetation Protection Law, called the New Forest Code. And we are going to discuss more about the New Forest Code, because it was constantly mentioned by the speakers that were before me. The New Forest Code brought a very important element, which is called Rural Environmental Registry, or CAR. This registry is mandatory for all the rural holdings in Brazil, in a way that the owners, the farm owners, or the title holders must be registering the rural holdings in this system, which is a digital system, in a way that they will be informing all the environmental conditions of this rural holding. So this CAR registry would be an environmental picture of this holding. It is a self-declaration act, and it should be verified by the environmental institutions, but it would give us a great idea or notion of the environmental conditions in that holding. If we have, for example, environmental passive or the need to repair the environmentally protected areas in that holding, the owner could adhere or access to an environmental regularization program called PRA. And if we need to repair or restore those areas, this owner will present a project of degraded area, the restoration of degraded area called Prada. Now, if in that rural holding, according to the New Forest Code, it's not new in this forest code, there are institutions and there are already obligations of the rural holding since the first forestry code, since 1934. We have this first environmentally protected area, which is called Permanent Protection Area. We call it APP or EPA, Environmental Protection Area, or Permanent Protection Area, APP. So there are several areas which are considered APP. One important APP, it's the APP of natural watercourses, which are these riparian bands along the watercourses. And the size of this area will vary depending on the width of the river. So if the river is up to 10 meters wide, the marginal range will be of 30. If the river is, according to you could see in the pictures, so if you increase those marginal areas to 10 to 50 meters, from 50 to 200 meters, these are the ranges or the areas that are permanent preservation areas. So they have limitations of interventions stipulated by the law. But this new forestry code brought a new element called the consolidated rural area, which was very criticized, but it was already validated by our Supreme Court. The consolidated rural area is the one that has human occupation with activities prior to July 28th of 2008. So let's suppose that this vegetation along the river was replaced by a pasture. It was replaced by a different crop or plantation. And this happened before June 22nd, 2008. For the law, this is considered a consolidated rural area, but we still have the marginal area of APP, but there is an obligation to repair that marginal area in a different fashion. It will not take into consideration anymore the width of the watercourse, but now the size of the rural holding. So here we have a measure, which is a fiscal module. Depending on this fiscal module, we are going to define these mandatory bands of restoration. Until the fiscal module, only 5 meters. After, from 1 to 2 fiscal models, from 5 to 8 meters, and continuing. This way, we lost a lot of vegetations to be restored in Brazil. We also have a different APP, which is around natural lakes. So depending on the surface of the lake, if you have the marginal band around it, the one that has up to 1 hectare of surface only needs to maintain the vegetation around the lake. From 1 to 20, you must have a marginal band of 50 meters, and exceeding 20, a marginal band of 100 meters. In the same way, if there is a consolidated rural area around the lake or lagoon, its mandatory band of restoration will depend on the size of the holding. So it's very similar to the watercourses. If the holding is 1 fiscal module, 5 meters of mandatory band for restoration, from 1 to 2 fiscal modules, 8, and then we continue in this pattern. Another APP around the water springs, if there isn't a consolidated rural area, we have a 50 meters of diameter around the springs. If it's a consolidated rural area, the mandatory area would be 15 meters, 15 meters. So continuing with the permanent preservation areas, the APP, we have the hillsides. So we have an imaginary line between the hillside and the hilltop. Everything above 45 degrees is considered permanent preservation area with all the restrictions of intervention for any APP. We have the hilltop, so we have some specific requirements. The hilltop, the hill must have at least a height of 100 meters from the plateau, or an average inclination higher than 25 degrees, greater than 25 degrees, and the third part should be considered then a permanent protection area. It's very common here in our region, these 2 types of APPs that you see in the pictures. That are the sandbanks, if they protect the grooves and the sandbanks, and the mangroves in all of its extension. It's very interesting that I'm saying here, because we have here 2 different ecosystems. And they are the most protected in Brazil, because besides being permanent protection areas, there are also ecosystems from the Atlantic forest, and also they are subject to the Atlantic forest legislation. So here I make a comment in regards to the Atlantic forest. The topic of a specific legislation, well, the first thing that we should ask is, can I do this in this area? If it's an Atlantic forest biome, I will look at the Atlantic forest law. If this area is in a permanent protection area, I will look to to the forest code, the new forest code, and I will see if there is the possibility to have interventions in this area of permanent conservation. So it's very important to bear this in mind. So we could be applying the two laws that interact harmoniously in our judicial system. We saw a first permanent protection area, which is the environmental protection area, which is the APP, and a second area, which is protected in the rural holding, which is also very important, which is the legal reserve. It's defined by our legislation as part of the holding that should maintain its native vegetation, original vegetation. If this holding is maintained in the legal Amazon, this legal reserve could be up to 80% of the holding. But in most of the country, it is of 20%. And the legal reserve is different from the permanent protection area because it has a bias of environmental protection, but it enables an economic use as well of the area. And here, once again, we must mention the consolidated rural area. For those holdings with up to 4 fiscal modules, if they had a consolidated rural area, human intervention up to 22nd of June 2008, they can compose this legal reserve with a lower percentage of 20% to 20%, lower than 20%. And here we had again a significant loss of the environmental passives in those rural properties. But this rule or this legislation was co-validated by our Supreme Court. In the legal reserve, this economic use or this economic activity should happen through the management, a sustainable management. It could have a commercial purpose, and that will need an authorization, or it could have no commercial purposes, only for using in the property, for example, wood, firewood, or wood for a fence, and it's restricted to an exploitation of 20 cubic meters per year. But anyway, in the legal reserve, it is allowed the exploitation or the collection or harvest of non-timber products, independently of authorization of the environmental institutions. As I have said, we had this characterization or this new point of the new forest code about the rural consolidated areas. But we have this important environmental passive to focus on the rural holdings that are in the Atlantic forest. There was a study from 2017, and we could see in this study that we have not only in the permanent preservation area, but also in the legal reserves, the passive of more than 6 million hectares to be repaired or restored. So that's what the public prosecutor's office is trying to do now. That's what we want, not only for the protection of the Atlantic forest, considered a hotspot of world protection, one of the greatest biodiversities of the world, but at the same time suffering a lot of pressure. But we have a passive that could be helping in the preservation of the environment as a whole and in the life quality of the human being living there, considering that most of the Brazilian population lives in the Atlantic forest biome. Of course, that if we talk about the environmental legislations, we would have in a graduation course, for example, this subject would last for 1 semester. So in this period of time of 20 minutes, I tried to include here the main rules in regards to the 2 main forest legislations, the new forest code and the Atlantic forest code. And a support material was produced for the producers, because the producers are the ones that apply the legislation out in the field. So we produced 2 comic books or 2 materials, one of the forest code and one for the Atlantic forest code. And the organization is going to put this material and upload this material to the drive of the event, for the study tour events drive, and it will be available for all of you. And it has the version in Portuguese, but also the version in English. And this material or this support material has a character. It uses easy language about the law, so everybody could learn how to apply the law where the law should be applied. And with that, I know that we already have some questions from the previous block. I don't know if I have to continue here or say goodbye. How do we go? Well, anyway, I would like to thank the organization so much for this participation. You guys now have my contact. I love receiving questions because questions, uh, if people make questions, that means that people want to do things correctly and people want to apply the law. And I'm available not only for questions here, but if you want to contact me via email to answer questions afterwards as well, okay? Thank you very much, Fabio. Thanks for your participation. Thanks for your presentation. I would like to make a highlight to your action, your activities, your team, and the Public Prosecutor's Office in Bahia, and discussing and bringing in details the legal requirements for the producers. Sometimes we see a distancing from the legislation and those that need to apply the legislation, and you are trying to close this gap, to reduce this distance, and you are taking this in easy language, easy vocabulary, with pictures and images to make it easier for the rural producers to apply to comply with the legislation, and then also provide the environmental services that this preservation will offer to the society. I would like, Fabio, just to go back to a discussion that we had in the first block when Mr. Antonio Massaro was telling us about the vanilla activities that he hasn't started commercially yet, but vanilla could be using as support the trees of the preservation forests, the preservation areas. So I would like to ask you, how can the rural producer that has the intention to to, be, to develop activities in the area of preservation, being it a legal reserve or a permanent protection area, a plantation of Atlantic forest species, but they want to produce commercially. What pathway should they take? Well, we must bear in mind that we have two different legislations or laws with possibilities of interventions that are also different. I will give you an example. Let's mention a highway that passes over a river. So this river has a permanent protection area, the APP, and the vegetation is Atlantic forest. And due to the economic growth and the development of the region, we need to make this highway, to build another lane in this highway. The first law to be considered is the Atlantic Forest Law. According to the Atlantic Forest Law, can we intervene the vegetation to make a double lane highway? Yes, it's a possibility of public use. According to the new forest code, is it possible to have an intervention in a permanent protection area to make a second lane in the highway? Yes, that's also a possibility foreseen or considered for the APPs. So the Atlantic Forest Law normally has a greater restriction of intervention for its economic exploitation. There is a movement here in Brazil, and lots of you already know, but maybe to our foreign friends, maybe they haven't heard about it, which is the Pact of Atlantic Forest Restoration. It's a movement that concentrates hundreds of institutions, being them public and private and the third sector, that has as the objective restore 15 million hectares up to 2050. And about 2 years ago, I started being part of this pact. Now I am the counselor of this backed by ABRAMPA, the Brazilian Association of the Members of the Public Prosecutor's Office in Environment. But before that, I was invited to design or to develop a material about the possibility to use the legal reserve in the Atlantic Forest. So according to the new Forest Code and the Atlantic Forest Code, is it possible or not to have this economic exploitation allowed by the new Forest Code in the legal reserve? Well, we have two conclusions. Two premises, I'm sorry. First, yes, we do have the possibility in this period of restoration. So those that have the need to restore, they have the economic feasibility allowed by the Atlantic Forest Law. But the legal reserve, which is constituted by a vegetation, they already have a limitation for its economic exploitation, and it's really strict. It will depend on the successional stage of the vegetation. So the primary vegetation or a secondary vegetation in an advanced stage of generation does not exploit economic exploration, but the secondary vegetation is a middle stage in the medium rural holding owner up to 50 hectares. There is the possibility of sustainable management use if there is an authorization from the agro-environmental sector. If there is a secondary vegetation in an initial phase, then it's a broader permission. Well, it's very interesting because I did not know how it would be the vanilla plantation before. And Mr. Antonio Massaro explained to us that it's very similar to an orchidea. It needs a support so it could be developed and grow. I was a little bit concerned because currently, and I made a comparison to the Cabruca cocoa, as explained here previously. This type of cocoa, the Cabruca cocoa, develops in the Atlantic forest, but it has already been a development cycle of our region where the people were cultivating or planting cocoa in the shadows of the larger trees of the Atlantic forest. And this made the destruction or the eradication of this under forest. So now, according to the new legislation, we cannot establish new crops of Cabruca cocoa. We cannot eradicate the underforest to plant cocoa. You can maintain the one that exists, but not for new plantations. So I was worried if the vanilla has some kind of intervention and causes the eradication of the underforest, as it's compared to Cabruca cocoa, we could not have this kind of intervention. But if only it's the support being used, if we don't have the vegetation suppression, at first, I do not see the impossibility of performing this activity. Wonderful, Fabio. So it really clarified the doubt that there are restrictions, but there is also the possibility for the smaller producers, the medium producers, mainly when they have a secondary vegetation at an initial phase or a middle phase where we have a greater restriction. In the legal reserve, exactly. The legal reserve, that's an important detail. In the APP, the restriction is stronger. It's more difficult. Okay, wonderful. That has clarified most of our audience. And also, if you have further questions to make, you can see Dr. Fabio's email, so you can send some more questions. Fabio, you mentioned also very quickly about the pact for the restoration of Atlantic forests. You want to restore 15 million hectares with this pact, and it's important to highlight the restoration of this Atlantic forest would happen with the seriousness of the legislation, as you mentioned. Areas that must be preserved in the area of the property. Several types of areas of preservation. So the Brazilian legislation, if complied, we are going to be able to preserve great portions of natural vegetations or restore them. Here, I have a question to you. The question says, how do you see the economic feasibility of restoring 6 million hectares in legal disagreements? The volume of areas that are in legal disagreements, but they need the restoration. And in your knowledge, are there any financial support for the rural producers to do that? Any financial support or financial aid? This economic issue is always constantly mentioned by the rural producers. To clarify everyone, after the moment that the public prosecutor's office detects the environmental damage, it has the possibility to make an agreement with the owner, demanding from the owner the respect to the Atlantic Forest Code or the new Forest Code. And only after my public prosecution office, I have more than 1,600 holdings whose owners are committed with these environmental adjustments. And the economic allegations are always brought to the discussion as a barrier or a bottleneck to sign this agreement or to comply with this agreement. We have several studies in relation to the cost of the forest restoration. What happens here in our region is that we are still with several remaining areas with the possibility allowed by law to have a natural restoration. So in the restoration of degraded and altered areas, if there is the possibility to wait a few years, so this natural restoration happens. That's one of the methods, the cheapest methods that exist. If eventually we have cattle in the farm or some kind of impossibilities or some kind of pressure on that area that will be restored, what the owner must do is put a fence in the area. If they don't even have that, he doesn't need to put the fence, but he needs just the natural restoration to happen in that area. But anyhow, even if the new forest code foresees economic instruments trying to support or help the restoration of those protected areas, we have some specific banking credits, but they are not compared to the credits granted to agricultural activities. So currently, the Brazilian state hasn't understood the need that to give credit to the production. They are giving credit to production, but they are not giving credit to conservation. And the producers have projects and partnerships with several institutions that promotes the plantation of seedlings and the restorations of permanent areas to help them in the restoration of those areas. Okay, wonderful. Now I have one more question, a quick question, very objective to you, so we can close this block and pass the word now to the coordination. Remembering that this afternoon, we are going to be discussing social and environmental projects, and this is a good opportunity that Fabio just mentioned on how, with an alternative could assist the rural producers to restore or recompose their natural vegetation, complying with the legislation. I believe that this could be a very good opportunity to apply this discussion in the afternoon session, where we are going to discuss the co-creation of projects. Fabio, a quick question to you, an important question to close. What's your view or opinion on the control institutions, the state control institutions, in relation to the use of natural areas for economic use by small producers? And you have already explained that previously in the legal reserve. It's restricted to the initial and middle vegetation phase, but there is this possibility. Here we would like to discuss what is the bureaucracy or maybe the difficulties that the state institution has to give visibility to possibility to this. How can the public prosecutor's office help in this? Well, every holding must be registered in the car registry, and in the car registry, we have all the authorizations, or with the car, we have all the authorizations or licensing for interventions in that rural holding. What we try to do and what we are still lacking or missing with the state would be an extension, a rural extension. So the state has to go to the producers and teach them how to do it, and teach them how in this environmental system they can obtain licenses and permits for the use and exploitation of native vegetations. We have few possibilities, but it's possible, they exist. So the pathway would be the structure of a rural extension to give a greater technical and judicial protection to that producer for a better exploitation of the property with a good environmental conservation. Well, I have two more questions here that I have to make to you. I have the information here that the use and occupation of the soil in a study by Professor João Batista from the UFSB University demonstrates that most of the rural areas are eucalyptus areas. How can we proceed to restore this passive in the region? Well, this has been the beginning of my environmental activity in the public prosecutor's office. The region has a strong forest vocation. That's why the pulp and paper companies came to the region. And this made not only for them to have their own areas of eucalyptus, but also leverage and promote or encourage the plantation of eucalyptus in other areas. I always say that if the region is favorable to eucalyptus, we must make the activities respect the law. So if we can have eucalyptus in place of a pasture in the product area, that's not a problem. If in this rural holding, it respects the areas of permanent preservation and legal reserve. What we think about this issue is to have a macro view of the region, and there is an instrument in Brazil called ecological economic zoning, EEZ. So we have to look at the region as a whole, see the volume of eucalyptus, and see if it's environmentally feasible. After the moment that you have a municipality with more than 40% only with eucalyptus, do you think that's correct? Well, we already had in Fórum Florestal the freezing of plantations in some municipalities because of the high percentage compared to the territory area. So the pathway is the EEZ, ecologic economic zoning. So we can understand and we could know what would be the limit of the eucalyptus. Wonderful, Fabio. Well, time is short. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I would still have some other questions, but I will send this question to the email and you can answer our friend from South Africa by email afterwards. I would like to thank you for your participation and all of your answers and information. This really enlightened or enriched this panel because the first block we talked with the rural producers on land use and the soil conservation and the legal requirements they have, and you came afterwards here to clarify all of those items of the legislation and the opportunities that we have in this interaction between the government, public prosecutor's office, and rural producers, so we can be solving this huge challenge that we have. Once again, thank you very much for your participation, Fabio. Thank you, João. And I would like to remember you that the Public Prosecutor's Office has a strong relationship with the Fórum Florestal da Bahia, and we are completely available for any questions you might have, any support and partnerships, so we can advance together towards a better Southern Bahia. Thank you. So I would like to kindly ask Fabio to turn off his video and microphone. And now I would like to invite here Luis Neves, so we can start closing our session, our morning session today here in Brazil, and in the afternoon session in some other countries around the world. So here we talked about the agricultural diversity and regional challenges. In the first block, we invited our colleagues. So I would like to quickly thank our colleagues from the first block, Renato Doria, Antônio Massaro, Felipe Marques, and Gleison Araújo, who talked about their activities and challenges and opportunities. Always with the exchange of experiences. And Dr. Fabio came to complement with the legal information, but he also highlighted the participation of the Public Prosecutor's Office with the Forest Dialogue. This dialogue provided by the Forest Dialogue involves the government, the Public Prosecutor's Office, NGOs, and also the academia, besides the local producers. And that's the way that I believe that we are going to be able to enrich the region and make it more prosperous. So with that, I would like to conclude this block, the session. I'm very happy to contribute and to work with you guys in this session once again. Luis, the word is yours. João, beforehand, I would like to thank you for your wonderful participation and your great conduction of this session. This is a characteristic that I had already known from the past, but I could see again here today with brilliant performance. This distinction to be able to articulate with the different issues mentioned by our assistants of the study tour, this is the characteristic that we need in this model of virtual study tour. So with that, we were able to transfer this message and the comprehension of the characteristics of the agricultural and forest productive sector in Bahia State. It's local implement, complementing with yesterday's session where we had already learned about the biodiversity of the several communities that coexist in this region. Considering the indigenous communities, we had the Pataxó leaders, and we had the settlements with us. We had the fishermen communities, the fishing communities, and also integrated projects, such as the case of Suzano and Veracel, as we could see in their work with the smaller communities. So with that, João, we get to this moment where we're going to conclude the first session today, where we want to transfer this image or this picture of the region to our participants of the forum and also the international participants, so they are better prepared. And now we are going to be able to pass their information to us now. Up to now, we had the participants had the chance to make questions, but now we had the transfer of information from the speakers to the audience. And after, we turn the way back around, and this is the moment where we ask the participants of the study tour so they themselves can give us their information to us. So in the next session, session number 4, we are going to have the first breakout session. Participants received, the registered participants received in their personalized agenda a link with the number of a room where we're going to have the group work. And that's the session that we're going to work with the title Co-Creation of Projects. So the objective of this study tour, we are going to be discussing under these conditions of agriculture, these conditions of forests, and these conditions of Atlantic forest preservation, using these models of sustainability, focusing on the forum's objective and NGP objectives. How can we jointly have a brainstorming moment of projects that could be of common interest and identify those that are the most promising ones? And in the initial phase, in this first moment, we would be working with sharing this information with the organization of the study tour. Tomorrow, we're going to work on this material, and the pre-proposal would be an idea of a mechanism to select projects and finance or fund these projects, and then we're going to have a second moment of breakout sessions so we can receive the feedbacks from the study tour participants about the design of these mechanisms. So now, closing session number 3, we would like to invite you guys to participate in an hour and a half from now in the breakout sessions. The participants will access directly the rooms that they have in their links, in their agendas, and this will be a moment of great interaction, a lot of interaction. Different from here, all the participants should have their microphones on, their videos on, and minds open to exchange opportunities and proposals, working with our moderators. And we hope to have a very productive session, and tomorrow then we can go to the next phase of the study tour. So, okay, João, I believe we can close the work for now and see you guys in 1 hour and a half from now. Thank you very much, Luis, and see you in an hour and a half from now. So let's close the microphone and the video and see you guys back soon. Thank you.